Turtle population all over the ocean is at an all-time low, and experts are absolutely sure they have no idea what is going on.
I mean, really, it's impossible to say what's killing all those turtles. It's probably plastic or something, but I don't really know.
America's top scientists are stumped.
This isn't the work of one group, or certainly one person. We all have a part to play in helping to save these majestic creatures. Use those garbage paper straws or something. This is our problem, and it's our part to play to fix it. Probably. I mean, really, who else could it be, right? Like, honestly, I'm kind of at a loss. I mean, who else could be behind this? I mean, millions of
Mario. Everybody likes Mario, with the likely exception of PETA. He's a lovable and familiar video game mascot that only has about a 40% chance of being evil.
Hey, that's better than most of us can say.
He's got dozens of both mainline games and spin-offs, and has appeared in hundreds. He's got a cartoon, a movie, a Lego line that just kinda happened, and Nintendo's gonna keep dragging him along well into the future. But where did his story begin? Well, most people associate the beginning of Mario with his first ever platformer, which is gonna be what I'm talking about today, but it technically isn't the beginning of his story. Mario began, funnily enough, with Donkey Kong. Mario himself was actually an afterthought for Shigeru Miyamoto, since he needed a playable character to market the game around other than the titular ape. He originally wanted the game to feature characters from the Popeye franchise, but couldn't get the rights at the time. So, Mario was created, then called the super creative name of Jumpman at the time. While developing Donkey Kong, Miyamoto wanted to create a character that could also be put into future Nintendo games, and kind of fit wherever he was put. Then, he took another swig of what I assume was an extremely alcoholic beverage and said,
"Screw it, just make him a plumber."
Actually, originally he was a carpenter, but, you know, his next big game would be Mario Bros. Very big difference, no super here. This was a platformer, high-score based game that you've probably seen somewhere or other, featuring Mario and an unimportant green reskin taking out monsters in some sewers for some reason. Yeah, that green guy's probably not important, I'm sure he won't come into play in any future games. But both of these games were made for arcades, and when Nintendo started development for their brand spanking new Famicom system, they needed an equally huge game to go alongside it. Miyamoto took his team's experience in side-scrolling games like Excitebike and used it to create a new side-scrolling game that would require the player to overcome obstacles and enemies while scrolling through a level to reach the end alive. It was a big idea and took plenty of technical know-how to cram the entire game on the Famicom's hardware. Miyamoto wanted underwater levels, underground levels, and more. He wanted the game to be much more colorful than its predecessors. They decided Mario should be able to stomp on most enemies to make getting through the stage easier, and fully encouraged the brutal killing of turtles.
Yeah, let's get him!
The game ended up being a huge mashup of ideas from all the previous games involving Mario in some way. The only small part of the game was Mario himself. He was smaller than most of the other objects in the game, but Miyamoto figured it would be fun to let him change his size through a power-up. Yeah, originally his size was just kind of an oversight, but they turned it into a feature. And you'll see that becomes a pattern in the rest of the development of this game. They have something that doesn't quite work, and they kind of turn it into a feature that makes the game work better and feel more unique. And this way, with Mario being able to grow, the player could feel more powerful after grabbing a mushroom and get that sweet dopamine But of course, such a big game would barely have fit on the cartridge if the team involved hadn't been a little sneaky in how they made it. A lot of sounds were reused to save space, like this, and this, and this, and this. They did this with some sprites too. All of this and more, and they were only barely able to fit all 8 worlds into the space they were given on one cartridge. The final game is something most of us know very well. Big Turtle Guy kidnaps Princess, Plumber Man travels the lands to save her, and destroy the bridge Big Turtle is on, killing him until Nintendo resurrects them both in the sequel. The game was the first platformer to really make it big, although that's in part due to the fact that it came as a launch game with the system in most regions. But even so, the success was massive everywhere, not just in the place where it was a launch title. To this day, it sold over 40 million copies on all systems it's been on, which not just includes the NES, it also includes future remade versions. But a lot of games from this era just don't hold up nowadays. Is Super Mario Bros. Any different? How is it to play it now? Well, it actually plays pretty well. The graphics are a lot more primitive compared to even the next few games in the series, but that's not really important with such an early stage NES game. Later on, they'd smooth out the issues in games for the system. The big thing back then, and the big thing now looking back at this game, is the pure amount of content here. I mean, 40 different levels with unique power-ups, secrets, and environments wasn't something anyone had succeeded at, let alone tried at before. And even today, while other games from the era haven't aged the best, either due to absurd difficulty, confusing controls or mechanics, or any other number of causes, this game stands out as one that is still not just playable, but genuinely fun. It was one of the first games I ever played, and while I obviously don't remember much about it from back then, it was really easy to pick up, even for my small dumb baby brain. The first level wasn't a tutorial, and there were barely any tutorials at all at this day and age, but it was still tailor-made to introduce you to this world and what makes it work. This first mushroom is almost impossible to miss, teaching you that the mushrooms are trustworthy and will help you, while this Goomba is dangerous and should be avoided, and the first one is relatively easy to avoid. Once you figure those two things out, the first level is relatively easy, but the game builds from there. By far the biggest challenge of the game is simply getting through it in its entirety with only a few lives, and only small chances of getting more, unless you use a glitch to cheat, of course, which I would never do. Remember, at this point, saving during video games was unheard of. Until The Legend of Zelda's release, it just wasn't a thing. And so if you wanted to beat a game, you had to do it in one sitting. Miyamoto had a solution for this, a really creative one that makes the game even more interesting today. By playing the game enough, you'd uncover secret warp zones. These teleport you to other worlds in the game. The more you played, the quicker route to the end you'd find, making it much more bearable to get to the end without being able to save. Nowadays, that isn't needed with most games, with save files being common, but back then it was actually really helpful. Nowadays, with newer games, even stuff that isn't super recent, but taking a look at New Super Mario Bros., you had these different warp zones, or warp cannons, that would actually teleport you several worlds ahead. These were OP and made beating the game so much easier and just really didn't fit in that game. Because in that game, obviously saving was much easier. But for a game like this, it's so much more necessary to make the game actually beatable and not frustrating. Some people swear by not using warp zones, but I always find that in these older games, they definitely make it a lot easier. Overall, looking at the game from a modern perspective and not just as a piece of history or a game from 40 years ago, with a bit of a graphical overhaul and maybe with saving thrown in and the warp zones taken out, this game could have come out yesterday. It really hasn't aged at all since its release 40 years ago, which is really impressive. What's even more impressive is the fact that the Mario franchise is going strong to this day. And it all started here. Here. Every gamer should check this out at least once, and I think it'll give them a newer appreciation for older games like this, as well as how far we've come.
Even if you're not the biggest fan of this game, I think we can all agree that out of all the games about a plumber defeating a dragon-turtle hybrid to save a princess by eating mushrooms, this one is probably one of the best. Okay, so there's not much competition, but I still think that in this...